Welcome to the Rob Seco Field Ready Podcast with your host, Jim Robinson.
Hello and welcome back to the Rob Seco Field Ready Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Robinson, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about corn planting dates along lines of yield, relative maturity, hybrid selection, and those factors that we should consider in planting in order to maximize yield with early planting dates, such as hybrid selection and that sort of thing. Today with me, we have Jacob Foley, Product Evaluation Lead with Rob Seco. Hello, Jacob. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, Jim. Yeah, I'm Jacob Foley. I'm a Product Evaluation Lead. I cover Minnesota and Wisconsin, so I'm from the Great White North of Minnesota.
Excellent. Well, we're happy to have you here. Jacob, can you tell us a little bit about what some of the benefits are, first off, so we don't bury the lead, on early planted corn?
You bet. So the big thing, the number one thing that everyone's after, higher yields, right? That's the goal. Now, you start out your year with, we're going to talk a lot today about yield potential, right? As you plant earlier, your corn really wants to hit that your full yield potential. Your planting is very important. The later you plant, the chances of your yield potential dropping increase. So we've got a lot of years of studies over multiple locations showing that your planting date, planting corn after May 10th is kind of that general time when you're going to start seeing your yield potential decrease.
Absolutely.
And you're looking at roughly 0.4 of a bushel per day after May 10th planting. Mm-hmm. So you really want to get in early to get your full potential out of your corn hybrids. Also working on that, choosing the right RM can be really important for your geography of wherever a grower is at. Choosing that sweet spot RM for season long from planting all the way to dry down. Getting the right RM is very important. Mm-hmm. Planting earlier can help you battle weed pressure. The earlier you plant, you really want to have, we call it kind of a weed-free period where you need to have your corn plant needs to have time to get a jump start on competition around it. So you want to have that free period where corn is uninhibited and can get a jump on weeds, shading out the row. That's going to help you throughout the season. Keep the yield potential high. You're not going to be if you can keep your corn plant competitive with weeds around it. You'll basically fight off weeds with the corn plant, the plant you want there. And then the last thing, and something that I think maybe some growers forget about, or it's not on your mind at planting time, but it's definitely pollination weather. I've spent a lot of time in nurseries pollinating, and having good pollination weather is really, really important. If you don't have good pollination, you're not going to have grain to harvest come fall anyway. Mm-hmm. So, for me in my part of the world, that sweet spot, you want to be pollinating your corn before you get to that hot, dry weather in August. And when I think of August, I just think hot, dry, bad conditions. You want to be in that late July, early August, where you still got moisture, temperatures are lower than, you don't want that really high hot weather where no wind, pollen can't get to silks are dried up. You need to have pollination. That's really important.
Absolutely. Silks tend to be about 90% water, and so when you have the hot, dry weather, it can, especially weather above 90 degrees, it'll inhibit pollination.
Absolutely.
And can really affect yield, especially in some hybrids being more sensitive to hot weather during pollination than others.
Sure.
Absolutely. So now there aren't just benefits from early planting of corn. Mm-hmm. There are also some risks associated. Mm-hmm. A lot of those risks can be overcome through different practices, product selection, that sort of thing. Can you tell me a little bit about the risks associated?
Yeah, so the things that we look out for, there's really a sweet spot when it comes to planting date. We don't plant based on the calendar. That's something we need to stress heavily. We don't plant based on the calendar. We plant based on conditions. So when your soil's ready, you need to be ready to go. So we want to avoid cold, wet, saturated soils as much as we can. Those tough conditions can lead to multiple impacts, but like soil compaction. We really want to get away from too wet of a soil, driving on it. We have sidewall compaction, tough emergence, uneven emergence, which leads to lower yield potential on its own. There are a lot of things going on. But some things we can look at to combat that. So like our Rob Seco product guide, every hybrid has an emergence and a vigor score, right? Mm-hmm. And we base our ratings on a 1 to 9 scale, 9 being the highest. Yep. If you know that you need a hybrid, say you typically have a wetter, colder soil than maybe your neighbor does, you're going to want that hybrid that's got a better score on emergence and vigor, so you can get more your yield potential starts at planting date, right? So you need that hybrid that is going to have good emergence in tough conditions, going to have good early season vigor so it can thrive.
Absolutely. And actually, to interject with that, we did a study back in 2017 looking at planting dates and emergence scores from our own characteristics we use in our seed guide. And what we found is that hybrids with strong emergence scores, so in our rating system, that would be an emergence score of a 7 or an 8 or above. And what we found is that hybrids with better emergence scores in the colder soils from earlier planting had a 2.5 bushel advantage over those products with an average or below average emergence score.
Very cool.
It's really fun to see. But not only that, but as you looked later on in the season, it wasn't just that those products were higher yield potential products. What we saw is that the products with lower emergence scores had the same yield potential in the middle planting dates and actually a slight yield advantage in the later planting dates. So it wasn't just that we were picking out stronger products with the higher emergence scores in them.
Okay, very cool.
So as we look at the increased risk of saturated soils, all hybrids have their emergence scores give some prediction of how it's going to perform under those cold saturated soils. But at the same time, there's also a seed quality factor that plays into the saturated soils and especially the cold saturated soils. So using products from reputable seed sources that have strong germination characteristics will absolutely help you in the earlier planting conditions. You don't necessarily want to use those blends or the lower value products that may be lower quality on the earliest planting dates, as you may end up impacting your overall.
If you're starting out with a weaker hybrid from the start, something that's, you're right there. You're not at 100%. I don't want to throw a percentage out there, but you're already limiting yourself on what you can get away with.
Yeah, right? And in those saturated soils, what you also tend to see is a decrease in the uniformity of the plants emerging, especially products with lower emergence score. And so what we find is typically that when emergence is variable and you see more than a 2-leaf difference in emergence, so some plants emerging 10 days earlier, 15 days earlier than the latest emerging plants, what you find is that you can actually end up getting a significant yield reduction from those plants that basically end up becoming weeds.
Exactly.
So if you have greater than a 2-leaf difference, what you'll find is that the earliest emerging plants may contribute 85% of the total yield if 30% of the plants are emerging late, meaning that they're disproportionately contributing to yield. But then the late emerging plants may actually end up inhibiting the overall yield potential of the field.
Right. So, and the best you can do to avoid that is just make sure you understand what you're planting into and the hybrid you're planting and what kind of, check your ratings. It's really important before you got to plant.
Absolutely. So, as we're looking at earlier planting dates and early planting dates, what are some of the considerations as far as relative maturity goes? Because as we look at total profitability, while yield is the primary driving factor, there's also a component of drying costs if harvesting above a higher moisture that needs to be dried down or dockage at the elevator.
So choosing out your hybrid, the more fuller season a hybrid can be, there's a direct correlation between that fuller season hybrid having more yield than a lower RM hybrid. So, knowing your area, where you're growing your corn, and understanding what you can safely get away with on your farm when it comes to your RM is very important. You mentioned drying costs. So, planting a hybrid that's way out of RM, it's way too late. You're going to get down to later in the season, you're going to have wet corn. It's going to lead to, you have some harvest problems, storage problems, dockages at the elevator, you name it. And so, knowing your RM, knowing what you can safely get away with. It's hard to predict your growing season, but do the best that you can to be at the right RM. As we look at planting date, we mentioned earlier May 10th. May 10th's kind of that cutoff date for yield-wise, but what can you get away with in your region, your geography for RM?
Yeah, so typically what we've seen is that while you begin to lose yield potential beginning May 10th at about a 0.4 of a bushel a day or so. It's not until a little bit later into May where you actually need to choose whether or not to reduce your relative maturity to earlier season products. Can you tell us a little bit about the dates that we've seen in some of our studies? So
kind of the general rule of thumb, if you're before May 24th, we say you can still get away with that full season hybrid for your area. So if you're in an area where 100-day corn is very average and that's what you can plant on your farm, you can plant it up till May 24th and still be profitable. Planting after that, you're going to want to consider an RM switch, moving down to an earlier RM. So that earlier RM hybrid is going to have more yield potential, better profitability than that full season hybrid. So between May 24th through June 8th-ish, so give or take, you want to be moving down, and we're looking at dropping at 4 to 7 RM roughly. So if you are that grower who's at 100-day RM, you want to be thinking about 93 to 96 RM. That is going to be more profitable. You're going to have more. You're going to have the when you're planting later, you're going to have more. You're going to have the right amount of growing season for an earlier day hybrid. Your drying should fall in line with where you need it to fall to be profitable. And then after that June 8th date, you want to. We recommend moving at 8 to 10 or 11 days earlier than your full season hybrid. So I go back to, if you're that 100-day RM grower, you want to be looking at 91 down to 90-day corn. I mean, you want to be dropping about 10 days to make sure you get that done. And even planting after June 8th can get kind of risky.
Absolutely.
There does come a point when planting corn, just you will not be able to make up your costs. You're not going to be able to make that back.
Exactly. There's a point where it's not profitable to plant corn after sometime after June 8th, not too long after June 8th. It's tough to make it pencil. And so looking at other alternatives, maybe silage, maybe if possible switching to soybeans. Yeah, there's definitely a point after in June, and we saw a lot of that in 2019 where with the wet spring we had, we saw corn planted late June, and in some geographies even as late as early July. And in a lot of those cases, it ended up being okay in some places, but in others, there's corn still out in the field today as of mid-February.
Yeah, being harvested. I mean, ag Twitter is great just to go and see what's going on around the country, right? But I saw a tweet yesterday. Was northern North Dakota. They were harvesting corn in the snow, and that is tough.
That's very tough, and it's tough to make money on that late planted corn.
Yep.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, so far what we've talked about today is basically that the earlier you can plant your corn, generally the better, but you don't typically start losing yield until after May 10th, where you begin to lose yield at a rate of about 0.4 of a bushel per day. You can continue planting corn of your full season hybrids up until about May 24th. After May 24th, it makes sense to then drop your RM by 4 to 7 compared to your full season hybrids. And then after June 8th or so, it makes sense to reduce your relative maturity down by 7 to 11 or 8 to 11 relative maturity days from your full season hybrids. And when you're planting early planting date corn, it's definitely worth considering what the soil temperatures are, the emergence scores of the hybrids you're planting, as well as planting high quality product that will emerge very uniformly and in a consistent manner. So, thank you so much for joining us today, Jacob.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you guys for joining us on the Rob Seco Field Ready podcast. Be sure to tune in on the 1st and 15th of every month. And until next time, stay field ready.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Rob Seco Field Ready podcast. Join us next time to be field ready.
A Parkville Media Production.